The moment they hooked chains to my bus, I knew someone had made a very expensive mistake. It was just after 8 in the morning when the tow truck rolled into my quiet suburban street like it owned the place. No warning. No knock on the door. Just flashing amber lights and two men in dark work jackets walking straight toward my vehicle like the decision had already been made. Most people would have panicked. That's exactly what they were counting on. From my front window, I watched them circle the bus, one of them already crouching to inspect the front axle. Calm. Confident. Like this wasn't their first time strong-arming someone in broad daylight. Interesting. I stepped outside slowly, coffee still warm in my hand, and called out, "Morning. Something I can help you with?" The taller one didn't even look surprised to see me. That was the first red flag. "Vehicles flagged for removal," he said flatly, already reaching for the tow chain. "HOA order." There it was. HOA. They always loved doing things the loud way, hoping pressure would do the work for them. I took a few casual steps closer, eyes moving the way they always do when something feels off. Years on a federal task force train you to notice details most people miss. The truck had no proper municipal markings. The paperwork folder was too thin. And the way the shorter guy kept avoiding eye contact? Yeah, something wasn't right. "You mind showing me the order?" I asked calmly. The tall one sighed like I was already being difficult. He pulled a paper from the folder and handed it over with the confidence of someone who thought this was routine. At first glance, it looked official. Bold header. Legal language. Stamped seal. But the longer I looked, the more the cracks showed. Wrong code reference. Formatting slightly off. And the signature. I almost smiled. Because I had seen real enforcement documents hundreds of times. This one? Amateur work. Still, I kept my face neutral and handed it back slowly. "Appreciated," I said. Then I glanced at the heavy chain now resting against my bus tire. Big mistake. Because in about 60 seconds, this quiet little HOA stunt was about to turn into a situation neither of these guys was remotely prepared for. And they still had no idea who they were dealing with. I let a few seconds pass before I spoke again. Silence has a way of making people reveal more than they intend, and both men were already starting to feel it. The shorter one shifted his weight and glanced back at the tow truck like he was checking the clock in his head. Pressure. Good. "So," I said calmly, "which HOA officer signed this?" The tall one blinked once. Just once. But it was enough. "We don't deal with that," he replied quickly. "We just follow removal orders." That answer sounded practiced but not practiced enough. I took another slow sip of my coffee, keeping my tone casual. Interesting. Because most legitimate removals in this county require municipal coordination. Now both of them were looking at me differently. Not like a homeowner. Like a problem. The shorter guy finally spoke. "Sir, we're authorized contractors. If you've got an issue, you can take it up with the HOA board." There it was again. Deflection. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. Meanwhile, my eyes moved across their truck one more time. No proper dot number displayed. Temporary magnetic door logo slightly crooked. Even the chain they brought looked older than the vehicle. Sloppy. Very sloppy. Behind them, I noticed movement across the street. Mrs. Keller's blinds had opened halfway. 2 houses down, someone was already standing in their driveway pretending to check the mail. The HOA loved public scenes. They just didn't realize this one was about to flip. The tall guy must have sensed my hesitation because he moved decisively toward the bus again. "We're on a schedule, sir. I'm going to proceed." That was his second big mistake. The moment he reached for the chain again, I set my coffee cup down slowly on the porch railing. Then I stepped forward. Before you touch my vehicle, I said evenly, you might want to take one careful look at who you're dealing with. Both men froze. Not dramatically, but enough. The tall one frowned slightly. Excuse me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached calmly into my jacket pocket. And just like that, the temperature in the air shifted. The shorter guy's shoulders tensed first. His eyes locked onto my hand like he suddenly wasn't sure what was coming next. Smart instinct. I moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my wallet. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just controlled. Because in about 3 seconds, their entire morning was about to go very, very wrong. I didn't flip the wallet open right away. Instead, I let it rest in my hand for a second, just long enough for both men to start second-guessing themselves. Confidence is loud when people feel in control. But the moment doubt creeps in, you can practically hear the gears grinding. The shorter guy spoke first. Sir, if this is about payment disputes, that's not our department. Payment disputes. I almost smiled. That told me everything about the level of information they'd been given. Whoever sent them expected compliance, maybe some pushback, but definitely not this. Slowly, deliberately, I opened the wallet and held it at chest height. Both men leaned forward slightly. And then they saw it. The reaction was instant. The tall one's confident posture faltered first, just a fraction, but enough to notice. The shorter guy's eyes widened before he could stop himself. Printed clearly inside the wallet: Federal Task Force. I gave them exactly 3 seconds to process it. 1, 2, 3. Then I closed the wallet calmly and slipped it back into my jacket like it was no big deal. Because to me, it wasn't. But to them, different story. The tall one cleared his throat, and for the first time since arriving, his voice wasn't perfectly steady. Sir, we're just following a removal order. There it was, the first soft backpedal. I folded my arms loosely. From who? A pause. Too long. Strike one. The shorter guy jumped in quickly. From the HOA Compliance Office. Compliance Office. Vague. Non-specific. Strike two. Across the street, I could now see at least 3 neighbors openly watching. Phones were definitely out. What started as a quiet intimidation attempt was rapidly becoming something much more public. Exactly the opposite of what the HOA usually wanted. The tall guy tried to recover his footing. Look, sir, if there's been some kind of paperwork mix-up, we can. I raised one finger slightly. He stopped mid-sentence. That silence hit harder than any argument. Because now they weren't dealing with a frustrated homeowner. They were dealing with someone who knew exactly how these games worked. I stepped one pace closer to the bus, my voice still calm. You hooked that chain, I said quietly, without verifying jurisdiction. Both men froze again. This time, longer. Because deep down, they knew. They had skipped a step. A very important step. And the worst part for them? This situation was only just beginning to unravel. The silence after my last sentence stretched longer than either of them expected. You could actually see the moment their confidence started leaking out. Not all at once, just small cracks forming where certainty used to be. The tall one finally shifted his stance. Sir, with respect, we were dispatched through proper channels. Proper channels. Another vague phrase. Another tell. I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way I used to study suspects who thought they were still in control of the room. Then you won't mind confirming which municipal authorization number you're operating under, I said calmly. That landed exactly where I wanted it to. The shorter guy's eyes flicked sideways. The tall one blinked. Once. Twice. Strike three. Real contractors who run legitimate removals know that number without thinking. It's basic. Routine. Automatic. These two? They were suddenly very interested in the pavement. The tall one cleared his throat again. Like I said, sir, this came through the HOA. Private Community Enforcement. There it was again. HOA shield. People lean on it when they don't actually have jurisdiction. I took one slow step closer to the front of the bus, placing myself directly between the tow chain and the vehicle. Not aggressive, just positioned. Control without confrontation. Across the street, Mrs. Keller had fully stepped onto her porch now. Two more neighbors had joined the quiet morning audience. Phones were definitely recording. The shorter guy noticed too. And that's when the first real crack in his composure showed. Sweat at the temple. Subtle, but there. The tall one tried a different angle. Sir, we don't want this to become a bigger situation than it needs to be. I almost laughed at that. Too late. It already is, I replied evenly. For the first time since they arrived, neither of them had an immediate response. That silence told me something important. Whoever sent them hadn't prepared them for resistance, at least not informed resistance. Which meant one of two things. Either the HOA had cut corners. Or someone higher up had gotten sloppy. Neither option usually ends well. The tall one finally exhaled slowly, like he was recalculating in real time. What exactly are you suggesting, sir? Now we were getting somewhere. I met his eyes directly. I'm suggesting, I said calmly, that you unhook my bus, before this turns into a report neither of you want your names attached to. That hit harder than any raised voice could have. Because now the risk wasn't theoretical. It was personal. And judging by the way both men suddenly went very, very still. They were finally starting to understand the position they had just walked into. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The chain still rested against my bus tire, but the energy around it had completely changed. What started as routine confidence had turned into careful hesitation. People always think pressure comes from raised voices. It doesn't. It comes from uncertainty. The shorter guy finally broke the silence. Look, maybe we should just verify with the office. There it was. First retreat signal. The tall one didn't like it. I could see it in the tight set of his jaw. He was the type who hated losing control of a situation in public. Unfortunately for him, public was exactly where we were. We don't need to verify anything, he said, a little too quickly. Then he looked at me. Sir, unless you're presenting a legal stop order, we're authorized to proceed. Nice try. But incomplete. I kept my voice calm. Authorized by who, specifically? That question hung in the air like a spotlight. The shorter guy looked down. The tall one hesitated just half a second too long. Strike 4. Across the street, someone's phone camera visibly lifted higher. This was no longer quiet neighborhood drama. This was turning into the kind of moment that spreads fast. The HOA hated that. I took another slow step forward, close enough now that they couldn't pretend I was just background noise. You understand, I said evenly, that wrongful vehicle seizure crosses into federal territory pretty quickly. That did it? The shorter guy's shoulders dropped slightly. Real concern now. The tall one tried to hold the line, but his confidence was thinning. We're contracted enforcement, he repeated, though it sounded more like he was convincing himself. Contracted enforcement. Another phrase people use when they're hoping it sounds official enough to hold. I nodded slowly, then glanced down at the chain still touching my tire. Then this is your moment, I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. Waiting. Careful. I met the tall one's eyes directly. You can unhook that chain right now, I said, calm but firm, and this stays a paperwork problem. A small pause. Heavy. Then I added the part that really mattered. Or you leave it there, and it becomes something much harder to explain. The word settled over the driveway like weight. Because now the decision was theirs. Public. Recorded. And getting more expensive by the second. The shorter guy slowly reached toward the chain. The tall one didn't stop him. And that told me everything. They were finally starting to realize. They had picked the wrong bus. The shorter guy's hand hovered over the chain like it suddenly weighed 50 pounds. Up close, I could see the fine tremor in his fingers. Not dramatic, just enough to betray what his face was trying to hide. Doubt. The tall one noticed too. "Hold on," he said quickly, stepping forward half a pace. His voice wasn't as steady as before. "Let's not rush anything." Translation: he was losing control of his partner. Good. I stayed exactly where I was, calm and unmoving, giving them nothing but quiet pressure. Sometimes the strongest move is simply refusing to react. The shorter guy looked between us. "Maybe we should call this in," he muttered. Another crack. The tall one exhaled sharply through his nose, clearly irritated. But irritation wasn't confidence, it was stress wearing a mask. Across the street, the small morning audience had grown. Mrs. Keller was no longer pretending to water her plants. 2 houses down, someone was very obviously recording. The HOA loved intimidation scenes. They hated witnesses. The tall one finally pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before he stepped a few feet away and made the call. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. His voice dropped low, but not low enough. "Yeah, we've got the vehicle. No, the owner's here. No, it's not that simple." Pause. Longer this time. "He's claiming federal." There it was. The word landed like a brick. The shorter guy's shoulders slumped another inch. On the other end of the call, whoever was speaking must not have liked what they were hearing. The tall one's expression tightened visibly. "Look," he said under his breath, "this is getting public." Smart observation. Too late. When he finally ended the call, his posture had changed. Not defeated, not yet, but definitely recalculating. He walked back toward us slowly. Carefully. "All right," he said, forcing calm back into his voice. "We're going to pause the removal pending verification." Pause the removal. Not cancel. Still trying to save face. I gave a small nod. "That's a wise decision." The shorter guy immediately began loosening the chain from my bus tire, movements much quicker now, almost eager. Because deep down, he already knew. This situation had drifted far outside their comfort zone. As the heavy metal links dropped away from the tire and hit the pavement with a dull clank, the tension in the driveway shifted again. But not back to normal. No. Because something told me this wasn't the end of the HOA's mistake. It was just the moment they realized how big it might become. The chain hit the pavement with a heavy metallic clank that seemed louder than it should have been. Not because of the noise. Because of what it meant. The shorter guy stepped back immediately after unhooking it, like he wanted as much distance from my bus as possible. Smart instinct. The tall one, however, was still trying to hold together whatever authority he had left. "Like I said," he repeated carefully, "we're pausing pending verification." I gave a slow nod but didn't move aside. Because this still wasn't finished. Across the street, the quiet audience had grown bold. Phones were fully visible now. Mrs. Keller wasn't even pretending anymore, she was watching openly from the edge of her porch. Public pressure works both ways. The tall guy noticed. And for the first time since arriving, I saw something very clear cross his face. Concern. Real concern. He turned toward his partner. "Let's start clearing up." The shorter guy didn't argue. He was already moving toward the tow truck controls, movements quick and efficient, the body language of someone who very much wanted the scene over with. Hydraulics hummed softly as the truck began resetting. I stayed calm, arms relaxed, eyes moving the way they always do when something still feels unfinished. Because one question kept circling in my head. Who pushed this order through? HOAs love paperwork battles. They don't usually gamble this sloppily in broad daylight unless someone's either very confident, or very desperate. The tall one must have sensed my attention because he spoke again, quieter this time. Sir, this was flagged through the compliance system. If there's been an error. I met his eyes evenly. If. That single word landed harder than a paragraph. He didn't answer. Because now he wasn't sure. Behind us, the tow truck bed fully lowered back into travel position. The shorter guy shut off the controls and stepped down, wiping his hands nervously on his jacket. They were packing up. But the air still felt unfinished. The tall one gave a tight nod. We'll be documenting this as disputed. Smart move. But not enough. I gave a small, calm reply. You should also document who approved the dispatch. That hit hard. Because now the problem wasn't just here in the driveway. It was moving upstream. And judging by the way both men suddenly looked much less comfortable, they were starting to realize something very important. This morning's job wasn't just a failed tow. It might turn into a very uncomfortable conversation for someone sitting much higher up the HOA ladder. The moment I mentioned documenting who approved the dispatch, the tall one's expression tightened just enough to confirm what I was already thinking. That name mattered. A lot. He masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. Years on the task force taught me to watch the half-second reactions, the ones people don't rehearse. Everything goes through proper channels, he said, though his voice had lost most of its earlier edge. I didn't argue. Didn't need to. Because the shorter guy was already avoiding eye contact again, and the tow truck was now fully reset, like they were eager to disappear before the situation grew any bigger. Across the street, the small crowd was beginning to thin, but phones were still out. Once something hits the neighborhood group chats, it spreads fast. The HOA was going to feel this one. The tall one finally gave a short nod toward his partner. Let's roll. But before either of them could move toward the truck door, I spoke one last time, calm, even, controlled. You might want to double-check future dispatches before putting chains on federal property. That stopped him mid-step. Not dramatic. Just enough. He turned back slowly. Federal property. I held his gaze. The vehicle is registered under Federal Task Force operational clearance. That wasn't something they had expected to hear today. I saw the realization hit in real time. Because now this wasn't just a disputed HOA tow attempt. Now it had potential paperwork teeth. The shorter guy's face drained another shade lighter. The tall one exhaled slowly through his nose, clearly recalculating everything that had just happened. Understood, he said finally. Different tone now. Much different. No more forced authority. Just damage control. They climbed back into the tow truck without another word. The engine started, amber lights still flashing, but the earlier confidence was completely gone. As the truck pulled away from the curb and rolled down the street, I noticed one more thing. They didn't speed off. They left carefully. Like men who knew this morning's mistake might still follow them later. The neighborhood slowly began returning to its usual quiet rhythm. Doors closed. Curtains shifted back into place. Mrs. Keller gave me one long, curious look before finally retreating inside. But I stayed where I was for another moment, eyes on the end of the street where the tow truck had disappeared. Because something told me the story wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The street slowly settled back into its usual morning calm, but the quiet felt different now. Heavier. Like the neighborhood itself had just witnessed something it didn't fully understand yet. I picked up my coffee from the porch railing. It had gone lukewarm during the standoff, but I took a slow sip anyway, eyes still scanning the end of the street where the tow truck had disappeared. They had backed off. Smart. But not clean. Because operations like that leave paper trails, dispatch logs, work orders, approval chains. And if there's one thing experience has taught me, it's this. Sloppy pressure tactics tend to unravel once someone starts pulling the right thread. Across the street, Mrs. Keller finally gave a small wave before heading inside. Within minutes, the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm, garage doors closing, sprinklers ticking on, the quiet hum of suburban routine pretending nothing unusual had happened. But I knew better. The tall tow operator's reaction when I mentioned federal registration kept replaying in my head. That wasn't the look of someone dealing with routine HOA paperwork. That was the look of someone realizing they had just stepped into a jurisdictional mess. And somewhere, very soon, a phone was going to ring. Probably at the HOA office first. Then maybe higher. Because once contractors start filing disputed federal interference notes, and they always do to protect themselves, people in boardrooms suddenly become very interested in what went wrong. I set the coffee down and walked slowly toward the bus, running a quick visual check out of habit. The chain hadn't left any damage. Tires intact. Undercarriage untouched. Good. They had stopped just in time. For now. I rested one hand lightly against the side of the bus and allowed myself a small, quiet breath. This wasn't the loud kind of victory people imagine. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just pressure applied at the right moment, and watched carefully as the situation corrected itself.
But something told me this morning stunt was going to echo back through the HOA sooner rather than later, because people who rely on intimidation usually don't accept residence, and they definitely don't accept paperwork that bites back. I glad once more down the now quiet street. Yeah, if they were smart, they level this alone, but experience too told me smart wasn't always granted.